Доброго дня, шановні учасники,
Good afternoon. The participants of our public event, which is today organized by the Equal Opportunities Caucus, National Democratic Institute, together with Center Women's Perspectives, NGO, and all those organizations that are part of the Public Council. Our today's event is happening on a very important day. Today marks the 10th anniversary since the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence has been officially opened for signature. This date is of utmost importance, and I believe that all of today's speakers, participants of today's event will be emphasizing and highlighting the importance thereof. And that will be done for a reason, because it will once more help us to recognize how important the document that was adopted is, the hindrances on the path of our country towards its ratifications, and what are our prospects. Before we get started, before we kick off, I would like to first introduce you to some of the technical things. Today we have the simultaneous interpretation available at our event that is happening with international experts' participation. To turn on the interpretation, please find the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It is called interpretation. To listen to interpretation in Ukrainian language, please choose Spanish channel. It will enable interpretation from English to Ukrainian. Whereas you'd like to listen to it in English, please respectfully choose English channel. It is very important for you to pick one of these two channels. Thank you. And I hope that you have figured it out and made the relevant choice. So, I would like to give the floor to Marta Chumalo, who is the deputy head of the Center Women's Perspectives, to moderate today's event. And in December 2020, she was awarded the International Award, Human Rights Tulip, by the Netherlands. She is a well-known human rights defender. She's been working on this topic for over 10 years now. And I'm really glad that the organization that Marta works with today are part of this event and participated in all of the organizational efforts. We are extremely excited today because we have brought together a very powerful, very strong group of speakers, and all of today's presentations are not simply addressed to specific target audiences. Our today audience, and the ones we want to convey our message to, is the society in general. Those who want to live in the world without violence, those who want to live in the world where the human rights are respected, where people are protected and safe. So we cannot narrow it down to certain groups of stakeholders, because for Istanbul Convention to be ratified, for the national legislation to be harmonized with it and implemented, the whole society should be working on it, because this is what everybody's looking forward to. And this is what our speakers and experts will be talking today, both local and international. And I would like to invite you all to actively engage in our today's event. All those who will be watching us on Facebook can submit their questions and comments, and we will happily answer all of them. So, Marta, over to you. Thank you so much, Larysa. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Before we move on to the expert discussion, before we start discussing main achievements, and hindrances and obstacles on the way to the ratification of Istanbul Convention in Ukraine, I would like to give the floor to a person, to the representative of a group of people.
Про які ми, власне, дбаємо і для яких в основному
we are taking care of, and
я не знаю, як і ми відключити переклад.
What do you do with the interpretation?
Це представниця
representative
жінок, які долають насильство. Це жінка, яка є нашою клієнткою. І я хочу, щоб вона коротесенько просто розказала про те, в яких умовах вона живе, що приходиться долати, і як вона дає раду тому, що відбувається в її житті. Прошу, Настя.
Доброго дня, мене звати Настя, мені 25 років. Ми з моїм колишнім чоловіком одружилися 15 жовтня 2016 року. І буквально 2 роки тому я звернулася в поліцію з заявами про домашнє насильство. Він неодноразово бив мене по нирках, знущався, постійно переслідував, постійно бив вікна в моїй квартирі, і буквально це порушувало мою особистість. Буквально 20 лютого 2021 року нас розлучили. Він довгий час не давав мені розлучення, бо казав, що він хоче зберегти сім'ю. Щоразу я чую від нього, що він мене любить, що він не може жити без мене. А коли я не погоджуюся з його словами, він говорить, що він мене облиє кислотою, знищить мене і моїх дітей і батьків. З поліції...
Me and my family. The police trained to restrain him, and there already were 2 judiciary injunctions. Last week, he had violated the restrictive injunction and threw a beer bottle into the window. He almost has wounded my younger child. Also, my older daughter is the victim of violence, who is not his biological child. This is my daughter from the first marriage, Yelizaveta. She is 7. Even when she accidentally sees him passing by her on the street, she's so much afraid that she simply starts crying. Now, there is a criminal proceeding, and the social services for a while were not informed about my situation. And when they learned about it, they said that I am to blame for this whole situation because he feels jealous. And this is why he tries to provoke me. That's why he acts like that. I'm very much exhausted because of it all. I cannot sleep calm at night. I start shivering because of every noise that I hear around me. And I would like to say that we should change the situation. When you become the victim of domestic violence, or your children do, you should not simply fill in lots of various forms and do paperwork. No, we have to simplify this procedure. Nastya, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Thank you. We have decided to start with the speech by one of the persons we are working with, to remind ourselves once more that very often we say that Ukraine, and it is true, did a lot to protect women from domestic violence, from gender-based violence, but in fact, very often, this is not sufficient. This is very little. In the situation that Nastya just shared with us, we're faced with the problems that are related to providing psychological assistance. After the Istanbul Convention is ratified, the state will be committed to create something similar to free of charge legal aid and assistance. For example, psychological free of charge assistance, because the psychological assistance that is available now leaves much to be desired in terms of its quality and availability. Both women and children require this kind of support, as we have just learned from the story. Also, there is the low efficiency of what the state does. She already has the restrictive injunction against urgent restraining order, but the court does not charge the person who is guilty of it properly. So basically, this punishment does not work effectively and people keep suffering from the violence. Here we have a huge, very complicated problem. And the Istanbul Convention is urging the people and the countries who ratified it to overcome gender stereotypes. For example, the police has gender stereotypes. Social services are blaming her that she is the one guilty of being the victim of domestic violence. And today, we would like to mark this day, the 10th anniversary since the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women has been officially opened for signature, and discuss what can we do to speed up the ratification in Ukraine. How can we prepare the country for it? And to start, I would like to give the floor to the head of the permanent delegation to Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, Mariya Mezentseva. We know that the Parliamentary Assembly has a very clear position regarding gender-based violence and urges the states the states to resort to effective measures to establish the best possible standards of services that are provided to survivors of domestic violence. Over to you. Good afternoon, colleagues, like-minded people, participants. I looked at the list of participants. Unfortunately, the majority of participants are women. And of course, one of the main myths of the Istanbul Convention, the document that was developed with Ukraine's participation, of course, it is not imposed on Ukraine because Ukraine played a very important role in drafting this document, which is a very pleasant thing. I see the minority of men present today, but we know that we are moving towards having larger and larger women's representation in the parliament now. With the 9th convocation, we have over 20% of women. But men, of course, will also participate in ratification of the convention. I'm confident that today's discussion is happening for a reason. It's happening for a reason on the day of the 10th anniversary. And as the head of the permanent delegation to Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, I keep promoting this document. And I believe that the 9th Convocation does not have a right to not ratify this document. First, I would like to say a couple of things about our strategy, because the representative of the parliament, in the first place, I would like to inform all of the esteemed participants of this process, all those who have been actively engaged in this process in the course of 10 years. And I believe that we will succeed in 2021. We had quite fruitful working meetings with the new leadership of the Council of Europe, and would like to thank the office. It means that all of the efforts by the experts who are working with this to dismantle the myths that have to do with the Istanbul Convention were quite good. We have even created small chat with the embassies, and every meeting that is organized by our delegation, we're meeting with various ambassadors of various countries. On the agenda, among other things, we are discussing Istanbul Convention. None of the ambassadors, even the Turkish ambassador, has not told us, do not ratify it, put it aside, think about it tomorrow. Of course, we are extremely interested in all of the preconditions and reasons that pushed the Turkish party, and the convention actually is named after one of the cities in Turkey, the Istanbul Convention. Why did they make this kind of a decision? So I started approaching my colleagues and they were like, Mariya. Some of them are not aware of what it is. They said even the main signatory, the place where it was done, decided to withdraw from this convention. But by no means does it matter that such countries, for example, the ones who form the same group with us, Baltic Plus, our colleagues from these countries have not yet ratified the document, even though there is sufficient will to do that. Who am I talking about? Of course, that decision will be made by the parliament as a result of a vote. That is why we are trying to adhere to this strategy. We're doing the so-called head count. Let us count the heads or the votes that we can collect. Of course, we are counting on such factions and servant of the people, voice, European solidarity, trust, and we are also negotiating with a positional platform for life and for future. So I have mentioned almost all of the factions, but top 4 are those factions that allow us to understand that the level of support will be 70+%. So next week, next plenary week, I have asked the heads of all the factions, almost all the factions. I have spoken to the European Solidarity and the Voice political party. Our political party has a certain portal that allows us to vote and express our will regarding certain issues. So this head count, we cannot use any other method. Allows us to understand that we have not simply 226 votes, but actually even 300. For us, it is important that it should be submitted and registered by the President of Ukraine. Of course, there is necessary support from the First Lady, and we know that the Prosecutor General also supports it. The Ministry of Interior also supports the ratification of this document, even despite the fact that our Turkish colleagues provided some arguments, because when we met with them in Strasbourg, we could discuss what led them to withdrawing from Istanbul Convention. And they said that we have plenty of national tools created to protect women from domestic violence. Well, this has already happened. We cannot undo it, so we have to focus now on working with our Ukrainian colleagues. Also, I'd like to inform you that there were more than 1 meetings with the Council of Churches, and we keep doing that. And what was the conclusion that we have reached? We have the same understanding in principle of what gender is and what is diversity. we have a very modern society. I believe that we have a very well-balanced understanding of gender. I've been working with it for 5 years, and you've been working with it for many more years than that. But I believe that both qualitative and quantitative change is visible. Also, we know that Mr. Kornienko recently in March spoke about the importance of creating the parliamentary discussion. Well, honestly speaking, I don't know how are we going to organize this kind of parliamentary discussion. That is why we've started, together with the Office of Council of Europe, organized certain type of discussions. Well, you can participate in it voluntarily, but to vote for it, you have to understand what it is about. Using the materials dated 2020 that were prepared by Council of Europe, wonderful materials. I believe that you all have seen it. I think that this is something that needs to be promoted, and I have acted MPs to start doing that today onwards, given that today marks the 10th anniversary, to try and dismantle all of the myths that are gender stereotypes related, as was mentioned by Marta, also religion related, raising and bringing up related, trying to deal with the standard type families, as they are called. So up to 10 myths that are going against all of the facts that are available online, both at local and national level. But the fact stays the fact. The majority of the parliamentarians understand what this document is about, including male parliamentarians. We're trying to convey that it is necessary to break the myth that this document is not only about better reacting to various types of pressure, both psychological, sexual, and physical, not only on women, but also on men and children. We see the social statistics that demonstrates that there was an increase in 66% in 2020. Since the beginning of the pandemic, it means that every second family has encountered a certain type of domestic violence. So as the head, or I would say the manager of the permanent delegation, I urge and encourage you, because we are the representatives of all factions. We constantly keep in touch with the Office of Council of Europe in Strasbourg. By the way, the president, Rick Dimes, with whom we've met to discuss various things during April session, said, Mariya, your country and your delegation will stand out among 47 countries. As soon as you ratify this document, I will come to that parliamentary week to be there with you, to make a speech and to say a speech before the vote, so that everybody understands that the Europe supports us and how necessary these steps are. I'm not going to take more of your time. I know that I've already mentioned a law. Regarding the structure of the convention, of course, we have, as I have also said 5 years earlier, we have mentioned to discuss it. We are supposed to have discussions in schools, and the Minister of Education agrees to that, that there should be such subjects that would allow us to convey that to children, because we know that it is much easier to teach the person how to act properly from this chart rather than retrain them. So head count, as I have already mentioned, debunking myth. The Council of Europe has wonderful visualization to do that, and during the next plenary week, that begins on May 13th, we have to do the so-called head count. We'll have a week to understand the exact number of votes. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It is a wonderful, great opportunity to once more see your shining eyes, to get inspired, even despite the fact that it's been 10 years and this process has started. Thank you. And I believe that the 9th convocation does not have the moral right to not ratify it. So let us head towards ratification in 2021. Thank you so much. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to you, Mariya, for such an inspirational speech. I'd like to say that the Istanbul Convention allowed us to look at the European map in a different way, because it allows us to see those countries that truly are part of Europe and provide for respect of human rights. And now I'd like to give the floor to Olha Stefanishyna, Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. The European integration is one of the main arguments that are used by us when we're talking about the necessity to ratify the Istanbul Convention. Over to you, Olha. We are experiencing some technical issues, so Ms. Olha will join us later. Okay, meanwhile, let us move on according to our agenda. And now I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Irina Herashenko, MP of Ukraine. Oh, she's not with us yet. Okay. Then we will give them the floor as soon as they are back with us. Meanwhile, I'd like to introduce, this person is a living legend. Without any doubt, without any hesitation, I can say that this is a person that we are proud to know. This is a person who was at the beginning of the Istanbul Convention, who was the co-author of the Istanbul Convention. This person was the co-creator and co-author of the GREVIO committee, the first vice-director thereof, Ms. Rosa Logar. She created one of the most powerful networks dedicated to countering violence against women, WAVE, Women Against Violence in Europe. I believe that this is one of those powerful organizations that the governments and international organizations listen to. And I am extremely glad that we have met in person with Rosa. And now I would like to give the floor to her. I'd like to ask you, Rosa, about the following. What can we say when we hear that the national legislation is sufficient, is enough, that you have a good legislation, you have good procedures, you just have to stick to them, to adhere to them? Judging from your experience, Rosa, judging from your observations of what was happening in other countries while they were ratifying their convention, what could you tell us? What could we do in Ukraine? What is the best practice that was introduced in various states when the Istanbul Convention was ratified? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes? Yes. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important event. And I wanted to thank all the sponsors, and especially, of course, Marta Chumalo, the deputy head of the Center Women's Perspective. It's wonderful to be with you in this important time that you really have a chance to ratify thank you to all the actors, to the parliamentarians. Parliamentarians play an important role in the Istanbul Convention from the beginning. You know that the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe was at the forefront of the Istanbul Convention all the way through, was very, very active, had a subcommittee, and is still very active. So parliamentarians play such an important role, I would say, in the Istanbul Convention ratification. And so I'm very glad to be here. And I'm also very proud that in the WAVE network that Marta mentioned, we have been working together with the great experts from the Ukraine for several years now. And you have excellent and committed experts in the NGOs, also in the state agencies. So it's really a very promising time, and I wanted to also congratulate the government and the parliamentarians who were introducing major improvements in the last years. And even if there is problems with implementation, which there exists in every country, these were very important steps. And I really believe that the Istanbul Convention will help a lot to accelerate this implementation a problem. That's what we see now in many countries that have ratified the convention, that there is a faster track, so to speak, to really implement, because there are big challenges in that. Maybe to tell you a little bit about Austria. Austria is a very small country compared to the Ukraine. We have only 8.8 million inhabitants. And I'm personally working in a center. We serve 6,000 victims of violence against women and domestic violence every year here in Vienna. I think Marta has been here in our center or not yet. I don't know, I can't remember it now, but I think we had a lot of exchange with many countries, and we are trying to serve the victims the best we can in here. So the Austria has been also one of the first countries that were evaluated by GREVIO, and that was the time when I was serving in GREVIO, the first 4 years. Unfortunately, I could not continue because of a change in our government. That happens, no? Political things happen in life. But I was serving for the first 4 years, and I was not involved in the Austrian evaluation because you never involved as a member of a monitoring body in your own country. So it was my colleagues who did the evaluation of Austria. And Austria was, I think, together with Monaco, the first country. Austria had very little time to prepare, only a few weeks, so to speak. And also the Austrian NGOs had to provide the first shadow report in 2007. No, in 2017, the report was already published in 16 or 15, I think. So it was an interesting thing to do. And this first report of GREVIO, so we have now 4 years of a GREVIO report, and we are trying to implement, still trying to implement the GREVIO recommendations. You can see we still haven't managed to implement all the GREVIO recommendations in Austria. We have made progress, but we also have setbacks. We are facing backlash to women's rights, unfortunately, in many countries, unfortunately also in Austria. And so the process has been slowed down, but we shouldn't give up. This is a part of our development in Europe. I think it's connected to our political history, which was a very violent in the 20th century. In the Ukraine was one of the countries very much hit by the 2 world wars, by the communism, by fascism, all these events. So we had a very, very conflictual history, and you are still suffering from that today with the armed conflict in the East. So I think there's a lot of a burden that we take with us, so to speak, in Europe. And the Ukraine is one of the countries that has suffered most, I would say, in this conflict. So but I think we have hope now, and so it's very nice that we can work together, even if such a small country as Austria cannot really be compared to a huge country like the Ukraine, but still we can exchange the experience. It's like in another field, you know. I mean, that's the question: why do we need an international convention? I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. If you look at medicine, for instance, not every country is working on their alone to find a vaccine or to find a cure. No, they're working together. Of course, fortunately, they're working the doctors, the scientists, the medical scientists are working together cross-border. They have developed common standards of how to treat illnesses. We have the standards in the WHO, how to classify illnesses. That's very important to make progress and to ensure that all our citizens have access to the best help that is available. So that's the same thing with the convention. We put together the standards for us to say this is what the citizens should get as a support. This is how we want to treat it. It's a common standard. And because violence against women is such a common problem, it exists everywhere on this globe. I don't know if there's another universe that has no violence against women and girls, but surely not on this planet. So some even say it's a pandemic. It's like a disease that exists in every country, and it has to do with the historical unequal power relationships between the men and women, and so it's a historical burden, so to speak, that we take with us. So every country has this problem. Why should we all sit in our national countries to find the solutions? So that's not an argument. You know, these problems cannot be solved on a national level, neither a medical problem, nor a climate problem, nor other problems. Our borders are kind of artificial. It's good to have the borders. We need the borders. We need the borders, and we need to respect the borders so that we can say, okay, this citizen belongs to this country, has certain rights. But otherwise, we have to work together cross-border. And also, their violence against women is such a cross-border problem. We are moving back and forth in Europe, and we need to have the same protection, or to try to get the same protection when we move from one country to the other. So there are many reasons why it's not a solution at all only to stay on the national level. It doesn't make sense. So that's why we have international law. That's why we have human rights law. These are also instruments that have been developed out of the horrible experiences of war. We learned the bad way, the way with so many victims, that war is not a solution, that we have to find a way of peace, democracy, and human rights. And this international law on human rights is the framework that we refer. It's a framework for peace. It's a framework for democracy. It's a framework for the rule of law. And we need it because maybe on the national level, we can lose track. But then there is another framework that helps us not to fall into a horrible atrocity like Austria did, you know, with the two world wars and fascism. It was a horrible developments not so long ago, when we think. So the international framework is very, very valuable for us as citizens of this world to try to reach this idealistic but very, very important goal that every person is born with rights and has a natural dignity and rights. So that would be my argument. I don't know if there are more. We can maybe later discuss more things, but that would be my main argument why it's important to have the Istanbul Convention. It is also an instrument for peace, democracy, and human rights for all, including women and girls. Thank you.
Щиро дякую, Роза.
Thank you very much, Rosa. In fact, I just realized that Rosa gifted us this very promising metaphor that Istanbul Convention is like a vaccine against coronavirus. It doesn't cure the disease. However, it provides an opportunity to have this disease in this very light form. So I'm extremely grateful for this invention, for this metaphor. I will continue using it as one of this very, very illustrative arguments. It's kind of obvious, but it's also very vivid. Argument for ratifying Istanbul Convention for Ukraine. Thank you very much, Rosa.
Thank you.
Now,
And
now I would like to present a person who is also a very, a friend of Ukraine, so to say. When the most recent report of Ukraine before CEDAW was heard, the Convention on Eliminating All Kinds of Discriminations Against Women, the speaker on Ukraine was supposed to be Lika Nadaraia. And we were very glad because Lika works on principles and she knows Ukraine very well. Unfortunately, the speaker was changed last minute, but Lika, while being at CEDAW committee and being the deputy head of the committee in the past and now also as a member and representing Georgia, she does a lot to promote the idea that we need to better ensure women's rights in Ukraine. And I want to forward Mariya Mezentseva's question to Lika. How did you manage to have ratification while having a church that is not separated from state, while having direct financing provided for the church in Georgia's state budget? We also hear that there is the communication with the main opponent of ratification, the Council of Churches in Ukraine. So, Lika, please tell us, what is your perspective? What we need to take into account on the way to ratification? And what main challenges we need to take into account and what we need to do for ratification to happen as soon as possible? Thank you.
I want to welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you, Marta, for such a rigorous presentation of me. And thank you for inviting me here to speak on behalf of Georgia and on behalf of CEDAW also. Because Georgia managed to, and I think that our secret that we are from post-Soviet countries, first country which ratified the convention, and in spite of anti-gender movements, in spite of backlash on women's rights all over the world, there is happening some sort of miracle in Georgia. Women's rights are going forward. And how it happened? First of all, I think that clear political vision, clear political will should exist, and persons who are committed in government to do so. Otherwise, it will not work. If we do not have leadership within the country which promotes, and this leadership is not on the top, it will be very difficult to break today's populist rhetoric, today's aggression, today's rise of nationalisms all over the world, and it's very much very much connected with ratification of convention. It's very much in connection with women's human rights, because women are those who first suffer from nationalisms. And we have experienced it once when it arrived, how we lost everything. Our education, our employment, our social protections, everything went, how we were withdrawn from politics. Once we have already experienced it with the nationalism. This is a second wave, and it's much more painful because it's happening all over the world. At that period, it was happening only on 1/3 of the world. Now it's happening all over the world. And we see how connected it is, how financed it is from the centers and from the powerful countries also. We just recently had with Marta feminist school, and we discussed it in very close feminist setting, what we are facing now. But if country has clear vision, and if there is committed persons who love multilateralism, who love human rights, who love freedom and transformation, then it can happen. And we see it where we have this type of leaders, and it's a 3 R's: right person, right time, right place. 3R position. If we have this, we see progress, even in these difficult circumstances, even in this painful for all of us, for women of the world times. And I can tell you that such examples recently, brilliant examples we see happening in Eastern Europe. We see it happening in Ireland. Ireland, who was always so conservative, now starts to break up. Now it's going on. Now there is introduction of human rights. Drastic abortion laws are gone away. We see that it's still possible if there is a organizing, if there is a willpower, if there is a communication strategies used properly, and if all those people who are on our side come together and hold hands. And this can be in business, this can be in political elite. This is civil society who is doing it and pushing it, but only civil society without political leadership, without ground, broad political inclusive ground, will not be able to overcome this problem. But with civil society, politicians can do it. And that's why, as we are again facing a period of segmentation, deterioration, fragmentation of human rights, we should, I think, come together. in a powerful voice, in a strong voice, in a strategic voice, let's call it. So, and change the world again, as we did it during Beijing, as we did it in million times. We are facing backlash, but backlash can be used as move forward, as a stimulus for development. That's my position. As for CEDAW committee, we always come together with our sister convention, because it's so great, it's so intellectual, it's so well composed, it gives such a result, and you see these results. In 3-5 years, you see tremendous results in countries, as I've seen in Georgia, as I've seen in Northern Macedonia, as I've seen in many countries, so European countries, even European countries who have a self-contentment of being gender equal, give a huge results when convention is introduced in proper and strategic way. We see improvement, we see step forward, we see progress. And I think that as a committee member, as an activist from Georgia, as a one of founders of our beloved GNEP, Gender Network Eastern Partnership, I would use all my energy, all my enthusiasm, all my connections, worldwide connections, to support Ukraine in this strive and in this progressive step. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lika, for these inspirational words. I indeed admire the energy and this energy that Lika shows in everything she does, in everything she initiates, or things that she joins. Thank you very much, Lika, for your strength, for your restlessness, for solidarity, and for your readiness to always help, support something that promotes women's rights anywhere in the world. And now I would like to give the floor to the UN Women Head in Ukraine, Mrs. Erika Kvapilova. We know that UN closely monitors what's going on with women's rights in Ukraine. And last year, we read the statement, the appeal to the Parliament of Ukraine, asking to create or to promote the creation of the society free from gender-based violence. And UN Women is a structure that is most involved and has to be most involved in this promotion. So please, Erika, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marta, and thank you very much. It's really great to see so many well-known faces and friends. Hello, Georgia. Hello, Austria. It's really great pleasure and congratulations to commemorating the 10th anniversary of Istanbul Convention this way. This is a really fascinating discussion. I would like to add that we are not here to monitor the development of human rights and implementation of international commitments to gender equality, but we are also here to help provide technical advice and expertise. And I think this is very important moment, because in that perspective, we have to look at the best of the best, existing tools, existing instruments, the world expertise which can help Ukraine to advance gender equality, to protect lives, to prevent violence, and to address all its forms. So, of course, Istanbul Convention is, from our perspective, very advanced and high quality treaty, which was much needed for the region, but also for the world. It's not a secret that it really complements CEDAW, and it's recommendation 19, general recommendation 19, and relatively recent recommendation 35. So it also complements this international framework, which is very important. And also, Istanbul Convention is seen as a very complex treaty. It's a treaty which is human rights treaty, criminal law treaty, and gender equality treaty. So this complexity and this coherence can serve as a good tool, as Rosa said, for acceleration of already existing national legislation, which is dealing with issues related to gender-based violence and violence against women and domestic violence. Also, I would like to say few or remind us of few features of Istanbul Conventions which are important for other work and other commitments. For example, this convention applies both in times of peace and war. And in this respect, it also corresponds and complements the whole women, peace and security agenda. And as we know, Ukraine has adopted recently its second national action plan on women, peace and security agenda. So there is a lot of correspondence and complementarity among international commitments, and Istanbul Convention contributes to that. Also, this convention recognizes that especially women and girls, which are facing intersectional discrimination, having, I don't know, migrant profile, or being disabled, or, you know, having other intersectional discrimination features, they are more vulnerable to violence and domestic violence. And again, this corresponds with the ethical imperative of 2030 agenda, leaving nobody behind. So Istanbul Convention is, and I think you said that, it's a result of the best minds and practitioners who have been for years dealing with the issue. And it's also a reflection of real lives of victims and survivors of domestic violence. It's not just a political treaty, it's a living experience. And that's why it is so important. And maybe one thing which I would like to underline, why Istanbul Convention is also very important, because it reminds us that the forms and types of violence against women and gender-based violence are evolving. There are new forms which are captured in this convention and nowhere else, like stalking, sexual harassment. And we know with the digitalization and social media, other forms of violence are appearing. And, you know, we have to reflect on this development and understand violence in its complexity. So the last thing I would like to say that, of course, the decision on ratification is always with the parliament and with the people of the country, and Istanbul Convention is never the end goal. But it seems to be, and it's proving to be, a very effective tool in many countries, how to protect health and lives and guarantee justice for victims and deal with the perpetrators. So it is certainly a treaty to seriously consider. And I'm very happy that Lika is here from Georgia, because I spent 7 years in Georgia, and when I came, it was 2013 when Georgia signed Istanbul Convention, and then I left in 2020. In 2017, Georgia ratified the convention, and I left 3 years after. And I can tell you that there has been palpable impact of this piece of legislation when it was taken seriously and implemented. So I think learning from others, and maybe also from some reports of the GREVIO members, would be very, very useful. So again, thank you very much. And we are very excited about recent development in Ukraine, where there is obviously political will to fight and to combat violence, gender-based violence in all forms. So we are very excited, and let's see what will happen, and hope it will be a successful story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erika. It was extremely interesting to listen to all of the speakers. Now, I would like to give the floor to Gender Advisor at the Council of Europe office in Ukraine, Mervi Patosalmi. Council of Europe is, how do I put it, it's something that holds the rights of the Istanbul Convention that we're discussing today. So how do you see the prospects of ratification in Ukraine, and what needs to be done by the civil society, by the leaders, women leaders, political women leaders, who are urging us to work with them, as was mentioned by Lika, so that this ratification is implemented. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and in this important event, and also to listen to the different viewpoints and different experiences. I think that this kind of peer-to-peer exchanges are really important, also hearing from other countries and hearing how the ratification has happened in other countries, for example, in Georgia, which I think that is a good point of reference for Ukraine. And I think that that's one of the issues, one of the things that is an answer to this, that what can be done is
I guess we're experiencing some problems with the internet connection. Mervi, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now? It's okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the Ukrainian context, I think that the recent developments, as it was mentioned, that the ratification is now on the table, and also I think that internationally it is really good to discuss, and this is also one of the issues. I think that the past year of COVID has really shown that the Istanbul Convention is even more important now than ever before, and also with the setbacks, I think that it is important to discuss the actual content, the substance of the Istanbul Convention. And of course, for the Council of Europe, this is essential for us, and I think that we are here to support whatever work is being done on this, and both on the government side and on the civil society side. I think that this is really a priority for the Council of Europe office here in Ukraine. So it's been 10 years since the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence was opened for signatures. And I want to say the full name of the convention. I think that it is important to remember what the name of the convention is, especially in the discussions that convention. So what we are talking about, and I think that this is something that civil society also does well, is that we are actually talking about preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence, and it's important to really dispel myths and misinformation and misrepresentations and this kind of getting into the sidetrack of the discussion. I think that it is important to discuss the actual core issue and not get sidetracked by forces that are not necessarily actually even know what they are talking about. And if we think about the convention, there are 34 Council of Europe member states that have ratified it, and 12 more have signed it. And of course, Ukraine has signed it, but the work continues on the ratification. And what I also think is really important to remember is that the Istanbul Convention is the gold standard. This is the term that is being used, but it is really the most far-reaching international in this area. And as I mentioned, it is really essential also for the work of Council of Europe here in Ukraine, but more generally also. And if we think about the Council of Europe work about human rights, democracy, and rule of law, I think that it contributes to all areas, not only to the human rights, which is kind of a more self-evident issue. And of course, the 4 Ps that I usually mention in connection with the Istanbul Convention offer a comprehensive way to combat violence against women. As Erika mentioned, it really is a complex and comprehensive convention in regards to prevention, protection of victims, prosecution of perpetrators, and then the comprehensive policies. And it has already been mentioned that many countries have legislation. Also, Ukraine have legislation on domestic violence. But I think that it's important to remember that that the ratification does bring more, and it is still important. So in this sense, I think that that's also good to remember. And I think that this is also the case for Ukraine, because there will be many elements that the ratification will bring in, whether it's about the comprehensive policies, so working in a coordinated manner in regards to the assistance, for example, law enforcement, hospitals, shelters, and other professionals working in this area, working in a coordinated manner, whether it's about access to shelters, and in many countries, actually, this is the area where there has been a significant improvements after the ratification, for example, in regards to the availability of shelters, or whether it's about investigating cases of violence properly, whether it's about prosecution and prosecuting them properly and within reasonable time. So all of these contribute to the prosecution and ending of impunity in regards to perpetrators. And already the monitoring system GREVIO has been mentioned here. And I think that this is something that is good to also remember when we talk about ratification of the Istanbul Convention, because it includes the monitoring system, and there is the GREVIO, which is a group of experts, so it's an expert body. And then there's the second element of the monitoring system, which is the Committee of the Parties, which is a political body composed of officials who from the states who have ratified the convention. And I think that the monitoring mechanism, it's not only about making sure that the state complies, but it is also about support and recommendations. And it was mentioned that it provides guidance on the country. So I think that for Ukraine, that would also be very important. I think that it's good to remember that, or good to highlight that even in countries that have quite evolved legislation and systems in regards to gender equality, the ratification really can bring in changes. So I'm from Finland, and I can talk about from the Finnish context, where the convention was ratified in 2015, and it came into an effect the same year. And for example, the network of shelters were significantly improved after the ratification. Because before the ratification, the shelters were meant for women with children, and it was mainly kind of a child protection measure and a system for child protection, and funded from the municipal budget for children or child protection. But in 2015, the funding was transferred to the state, and the shelters became more inclusive, so that all victims of domestic or intimate partner violence had access to them. Also, the number of shelters has increased. And other improvements include, for example, 24/7 national hotline, establishment of sexual violence referral centers, which didn't exist at all before the ratification. And in Finland, one thing that is still pending, that is required by the Istanbul Convention, is about the law on rape. It is expected that this year there will be a draft law in Finland where the rape law will be changed so that it will be based on consent. At the moment, it is based, as in many countries, either violence or threat of violence, and this is also one of the issues that the Istanbul Convention has really contributed to. So I think that these examples also are useful for Ukraine in the sense that they can show what are the changes that happen. And also, I think that in the Finnish context, I don't know how it's been, for example, in Georgia and other contexts, is that the Istanbul Convention, after the ratification, it has provided a framework for pushing for changes. So before the ratification, it was said that certain things are not possible. You know, it can't be done. But after the ratification, all this, so I think that this is also useful justification for example, some of the issues in regards to the ratification and the importance of it, and also for those of you who are working for the ratification. And I think that one of the important basic messages is to remember that the Istanbul Convention saves lives. This is the basic message that I think that is really important to remember. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mervi. We are behind our schedule, but nevertheless, I would like to give the floor to the head of the program on preventing and countering gender-based violence from UNFPA. This organization specifically does a lot for the shelters in Ukraine to be available, for the services to be of better quality, to have a broader range of them. Olesya, over to you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to emphasize that Ukraine has achieved a huge progress in developing the national system for countering and preventing domestic violence, adhering to the principles that are outlined in the Istanbul Convention. 4 Ps that have been mentioned before: prevention, protection and support of victims, prosecution of offenders, integrated policies. However, despite such an advancement, the ratification of Istanbul Convention is a very much needed step to provide for effective operation of the system that would protect the survivors, including Ukrainian citizens who are temporarily residing in Europe. Ratification will also allow us to better prosecute the perpetrators and better investigate the domestic violence related cases. And the consolidated decisive position of Ukrainian political leaders aimed at ratification of Istanbul Convention is of utmost importance. And this is a logical and important step to further keep expanding the comprehensive system of helping domestic violence survivors and shaping the culture of non-tolerance to domestic violence. We hope that in the nearest future that we will be celebrating their ratification and that we will keep actively working on protecting those who are affected by the domestic violence. Thank you so much, Olesya. And now, summing up the first part of our today's discussion, I would like to introduce the person without whom countering domestic violence in Ukraine, well, I don't know which way it would have passed. Halyna Skipalska, Executive Director of the Ukrainian Foundation for Public Health. Over to you, Halyna. Thank you so much, Marta. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely glad to see all of you here, and I'm extremely glad to participate in discussing things that are of utmost importance for the civil society in Ukraine. Several speakers today have already mentioned the role of the civil society in this process, and being a representative of one of such organizations, I would like to share my thoughts in this regard. The Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence is the golden standard. It is a comprehensive international framework that is aimed at prevention, accountability, and strategies in countering violence against women and domestic violence. I would like to highlight the following. The convention mentions the approach that is very much needed for effectively putting an end to the violence, which requires coordinated efforts by all organizations, institutions, as well as civil society. Civil society organizations and charity foundations, the civil society in general, play a decisive role in preventing and countering domestic violence. CSOs and charity foundations already are providing services to domestic violence survivors, organize awareness-raising campaigns that are aimed at changing the situation in our country. Nevertheless, to a certain extent, they lack funding, therefore they cannot speed up their efforts. Of course, civil society organizations and charity foundations can be used as a good resource, and they can be allowed to do their job to the best extent. There should also be a proper cooperation between civil society organizations and public organizations, and they should also get access to money from the local budget. The pandemic and the lockdown has aggravated the situation with protecting women and girls from domestic violence and gender-based violence. We know that the quarantine led to increase in domestic violence cases and violations, including psychological violence, which once more emphasizes how important it is to improve the system of providing social services, and that civil society organizations should be playing an important role in this process. It's been actually discussed in the last 2 years that there were lots of very positive achievements. A number of various bylaws that were adopted, amendments and changes to the codes, decrees, and other types of pieces of legislation. And thanks to the donors who are present today, the new services were introduced for the survivors of domestic violence, the services that were not in place 5 years ago at all. There were some shelters, some places, but now the things are getting better. And the communities have started actively introducing models for providing assistance to the domestic violence victims, such as hotlines, working in various regions of the country, shelters, special rooms. But at the same time, there are certain obstacles and hindrances that do not allow charity foundations and civil society organizations to become full-fledged providers of such services, just the same as public state-owned organizations. CSOs and charity foundations are working in communities, but they do not cooperate that much with the state and do not get a lot of funding from the local budgets. And I would like to say that it has not yet been properly regulated. Some of the charity foundations or some of the regions have certain practice that is being used at the local level, but I would say that this is more of an exception rather than a widespread approach that would cover the whole territory of Ukraine. That is why civil society organizations are very much interested in this reform to be implemented so that we can get access to funding as social services providers. Then the social domain will be able to develop quite rapidly, to be flexible, and we will be able to very rapidly react to the requests coming from the vulnerable groups of women who do not have access to daytime centers or shelters. And the communities will be able to fund for good quality, cheap services, regardless of whether those are provided by the public or civil society organization. I would like to also address those MPs who are with us today at this event and who are listening to me and other speakers now. The members of the parliament are those people who are listening to the opinion of the civil society, who are shaping the new way of thinking. And that is why, yes, you should support ratification of the Istanbul Convention. You can do that. On the other hand, you can take a very solid stance that has to do with domestic violence against women. You can mention it when talking to mass media representatives. You can mention it in every single public speech made by you. You can also raise awareness about the violence against women by engaging other colleagues, journalists, and other categories of well-known personalities to discuss in this topic. We, the civil society, suggest to think about how can we join our efforts so that the Istanbul Convention in the end is ratified. In the end, this will help us all to start moving forward. It will improve social services provided to those who fell victims to domestic violence, those who need our support and aid. Thank you. Thank you so much, Halyna. I see we have some questions. Inna, would you like to ask a question or make a comment? Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry that I'm speaking from the car. I was not sure when will be my turn to speak, and I was supposed to speak earlier, but we're behind our schedule. That's why I'm already in the car. And Halyna addressed the MPs who are present at this meeting. As one of MPs, I'd like to make a suggestion as well. because I'm always ready to speak about sexism, domestic violence, gender equality. But I would like to say that quite often, I think that my position could have, my voice could have been louder if I knew about some examples, life stories, because they work much better than simply providing statistics or numbers in general. And here I have a question to Halyna. I'm very much ready to be a part of this process. My first question is it okay to share personal stories of other people? This is more of an ethical question. We have to think about the consent of those people. But if it is possible to gain their consent, I would be very much grateful for some information from you, because I'm ready to speak about it, to highlight it. So let us keep in touch. The organizers have my contact details, my assistant's contact details, and I would very much like to join you, to communicate it to my colleagues from the parliament. As soon as you find some kind of exemplary story, it's not like I want to work with somebody's life drama, turn it into a media story, but personal stories work really good, really well. So I would very much like us to discuss it and think about how can we personalize it to more effectively convince people. Marta, can I comment back? Yes, sure, go ahead. Ina, thank you so much for replying right away. We are ready and open to cooperation. Larysa and Marta have my contact information. Of course, we do have life stories. There are lots of them. Maybe we should not start from the stories. There is the social apartment, mini shelter that we have located in Kiev that served as the model. We worked on it together with UNFPA, and they have more than 10 shelters that they're working with. And when there is this kind of a visit and you meet, of course, we're gonna look at the quarantine restrictions with the clients, with the victims of domestic violence. You will be able to learn more about the problem, what women come with, what is being done by psychologists, social workers, how they can help, and what we lack. So first, I'd like to invite you to come to our Kyiv social apartment because the restrictions are not that strict anymore. So there we could also talk about the life stories that some of our clients have and how can we use these stories, how can we present them. Thank you so much. Deal. Ina, I would like to also tell that our conference started with a story by a woman who told her story in a nutshell, who told about what she had to go through, what she is still going through. And these stories can be used because they allow us to better convey the need for ratification of the Istanbul Convention. I also would like to say that our organization has multiple examples that we can share with you. I believe that there are lots of other organizations that are also present here today. The representatives of these organizations are ready to convey these stories to you, share them with you, so that we can take a turn for better. I saw Larysa raising her hand. Larysa? I do not see you raising your hand anymore. Thank you, Marta. In fact, I put my hand down because you have mentioned the beginning of our meeting, but I would like to quickly react back to Ina's question and say that we, the representatives of the civil society, need members of the parliament to submit very clear requests So should we submit these stories to you, or should we send various suggestions, proposals? Because it is not always constructive. So I suggest, given how many communication means we have, we could provide assistance ad hoc, because we can react quite rapidly if you need stories, for example. And we can also join our efforts in working on communication strategy, advocacy strategy, etc. I think that Ina would agree with me that it is important for our cooperation to not happen from time to time, to not happen on special occasions, but to do this continuously, so that we all the time feel that MPs would like to get our support. So say we are moving towards ratifying Istanbul Convention. What do you need? Maybe you need some stories. Maybe you need some kind of information. Maybe you need information from the focus groups. But we cannot just do that to have it just in case. Because then we will be just using lots of resources in vain. And within our public council, we are working as volunteers. So we are very happy to do that, but we would like to very much do it depending on what requests and inquiries you have. Thank you, Larysa. I see Maryna Bardina, an MP, also raising her hand. Maryna, over to you. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I wanted to suggest a project that we could implement all together, because we're talking about countering domestic violence, and Ina asked wonderful questions about the stories of women who are victims to domestic violence. There are lots of women who are ready to speak about it openly, who are not afraid to speak about it. So if we're speaking about joint project, why don't we make some kind of a very modern, up-to-date project that is called You're Not Alone, when MPs, members of the parliament, meet together with these girls and publicly share these stories. For example, we could engage Ukrainian bloggers or other well-known personalities who would share these stories that would truly demonstrate the problems with the domestic violence that real people are faced with. That would help us in advocating Istanbul Convention in Parliament, among other things. So I'd like to encourage us, together with donor organizations, civil society organizations, our international partners, members of the Parliament, to organize one large public project that would engage everybody and allow us to share real-life stories, demonstrate domestic violence victims, tell what situation they lived in, what contact they are in now.
Дякую, Марино.
Thank you, Marino. In fact, I have many comments, because I think that we need to be careful to have this balance, to maintain this balance, so that women who are victims of violence would not become an instrument in the hands of people who use their stories. And we also need very sensitively approach the experience, what they can or cannot do. I think it's a good idea to discuss at some other platform, and also maybe we will be able to implement this initiative of Inna and Maryna. And now I need to hand over to Ella Lamach, who will continue to moderate. She is the head of the Democracy Development Center. Several weeks ago, she initiated this panel memory diving for people who have been developing women's movement and feminism in Ukraine. And I think that one day we will also be remembering this event as one of the stories of the feminist movement. Ella, thank you very much for doing what you're doing, and I'm giving over to you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can see me and can hear me well, because unfortunately I have Zoom problems, but we have already started talking about the next part of our event, of our discussion, our presentation for the 10th anniversary of the Istanbul Convention, and these are the challenges for ratifying of the convention. And Olesya and also other participants have already started discussing the specific ways for overcoming those barriers and challenges. So Maryna, I would like to say that I visited Austria 5 or 6 years ago, and I saw in central streets of Vienna silhouettes of men and women, and they had stories of every man, every woman that were in the situation of violence. So those were anonymous stories, but those stories were impressive. I think that we can think of something similar, and we also had experience of certain installations in Kiev, and we could think of making those installations also in Verkhovna Rada or somewhere in Mariinsky Park where the MPs walk around a lot. But also we have already started talking about how it is possible to solve the silencing of violence cases. And I would like to give the floor to Maryna Bardina, who has already started speaking about the real ways of overcoming the situation of silencing of cases of violence. And I would like to ask you the following question. What are the challenges, what are the barriers for ratification of the convention exist, and what is there else that we can do, except the ones we have already discussed? If you may, I would like to ask everyone to take not more than 5 or 7 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. I will try to be brief, because for me, this public campaign is, of course, a priority. And it depends also on implementation of this public campaign. I think that the opponents of ratification of Istanbul Convention, they are working under the table, I would say, and rather powerfully, they work in the communities. And on the contrary, we need to involve the support of celebrities, of people who have certain authority in the society, so they would protect such instrument of combating and prevention domestic violence in families. So I would, of course, use the support of famous Ukrainians from various spheres, not necessarily experts. It doesn't have to be only experts, but also other people who really want to end the situation and think that violence is not acceptable in Ukrainian society and can support such a campaign. We've seen in public space many campaigns to support responsible parenting, to support equal division of labor in the family. So I would vote for a public campaign where at city lights, at billboards, we would see this information that Istanbul Convention is primarily the instrument to combat violence, not everything else that is involved in the myths surrounding it. And partially those myths are based on seemingly the cases of using the words gender or sexual orientation, but in the Code of Labor, the current Code of Labor, there is a precedent of using the words gender and sexual orientation. So the Istanbul Convention, its ratification would not be precedental in this matter. So I would ask all of us to think about this broad public campaign that would primarily reach Ukrainian citizens, people who use public transportation, people who walk into hospitals, in all possible places where we can place PSA. Speaking about the MPs, of course, the communication about the content of the Istanbul Convention needs to happen simultaneously. But before we have the support of the society, we will continue to encounter backlash, opposition from our opponents, and it also impacts the activities of the MPs. I would like to share some news. At the subcommittee and tomorrow on the Committee of Law Enforcement, we reviewed another draft law on increasing responsibility for domestic violence. It was an alternative draft law. We did not develop a separate law, but we tried to work alternatively to increase responsibility for domestic violence. And we see that very actively, both the First Lady of Ukraine is involved in the issue of countering domestic violence, and also the Prosecutor General's office and other ministers and vice prime ministers have statements on this. We see this public support. But indeed, the support needs to be more powerful, primarily from the side of the society. And the second step also, I think, it will help ease these reservations that MPs still seem to have. These are the two messages that I suggest all of us think about and then start acting. Thank you, Maryna. And now I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Irina Hrashenko, MP of Ukraine. And I remember that Irina, together with other MPs, invited the NGOs during the previous convocation to meet the Council of Churches. And we had a very long dialogue. And the two sides kept convincing each other, but at the same time, we know that unfortunately, the previous convocation of the Verkhovna Rada did not support the ratification of the convention. Irina, in your opinion, what are the challenges for ratification of the convention and how would it be possible to overcome them? The floor is yours. Thank you. It is indeed symbolic that we are having our discussion on the 10th anniversary of opening the Istanbul Convention for signature. In my opinion, Ukraine is now not closer to the result than it was before. And the barriers, the stereotypes hinder it, and primarily these are internal party stereotypes. I'm very skeptical about the discussion regarding that if we keep telling touching stories, it will influence people who are blocking the ratification. Evidently not. They will continue to say that we have criminalized domestic violence, that in the previous years we have managed to increase, strengthen this criminal responsibility, and this as a government, as the state, we demonstrate the protection of women and children and anybody, men also, if you're talking about domestic violence. Well, it is about the word gender, this mythical word gender for them. This is the main stereotype. And I have many things to say to the NGOs about this. They think that overcoming this stereotype about the word gender, also among the churches, also among the representatives of the government and in the parties, they think that only the politicians should be doing this. But no, the NGOs need to strengthen their advocacy to overcome the stereotypes, to work with leaders of public opinion, to work with the Council of Churches and with all confessions, and also with political parties. Because in every political party, unfortunately, there is backlash and there is opposition to the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, and these opposition have very powerful and strong advocates. Talking about the politicians, using the opportunity, I'd like to ask the colleagues present here the following. We can say a lot of loud words, but your actions are key. Do you understand how devoted you are to fighting stereotypes, sexism, domestic violence that keeps turning up as this cancer that starts with stereotypes and sexism? There is this MP is Kiva. There is nothing more awful than he is. He's a sexist. He's a shame for the Ukrainian parliament. And last year he came to Verkhovna Rada with flowers and he gave it to all the female deputies. Can you imagine? Everybody took the flowers because it was before March 8th, and only several female deputies, and I think it was our faction and also several Holos deputies, they refused the flowers. And it's not about political ideas, it's about the principles. If women, if female MPs in general say the right things during the conferences with organizations where we sit in the like-minded circle and say the same things, but then they allow all these stories with Dubinsky and also with Kiva. We need to start with ourselves, nothing will change if we keep doing that. I work with Mrs. Bardina in the Committee for Foreign Affairs, and the issue of ratifying the Istanbul Convention is one of the obligations of Ukraine for the Council of Europe, and it also makes us closer to the EU because the European Parliament has recently adopted this statement asking all EU member countries to ratify. The Russian world, on the contrary, they have decriminalized domestic violence now. So one of the supporters in the current parliament of fighting against the Istanbul Convention is the representative of people's servant, Mr. Jurash, who is also the member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and he created the Interfaction Union for Family Values, and it has over 300 people now. And at any platform, also using his status as a representative of the Profile Committee, he is fighting against the Istanbul Convention. So I think that's internal party discussion, and also appealing to parties, political parties from the NGOs, to political parties and to the Council of Searches. It could have helped a lot to overcome those barriers. I don't see any standing chance to ratify Istanbul Convention in the current parliament during the current convocation. To overcome this, we need the serious involvement of the NGOs, and we also need to work internally in the parties on this. Thank you very much, Irina. And it turns out the Istanbul Convention is like, it's like a glass half empty or half full, right? So people who continue working with the national legislation, they have such arguments like why we need to ratify the Istanbul Convention, because the national legislation, we have improved it and we continue improving it. At the same time, the NGOs, they keep saying that by ratifying, by improving the national legislation, we will be able to better ratify, to better implement the Istanbul Convention by implementing our legislation. Inna, Mrs. Sofson, are you with us now? I would like to give the word to you. Inna, over to you. I apologize for disappearing. I have certain connection problems. My phone is getting too hot and it's turning off. So if you don't mind, I will be without the video. Then it may be able to work longer. I apologize for this. On ratification, I haven't unfortunately heard everything of what Maryna said. I connected when Irina was speaking. However, I think that the problem isn't new. And I'm grateful to everybody who previously made effort. Colleagues from the previous convocations of the parliament who raised this issue, but we see that the problem remains, unfortunately. And despite all the years of effort, I have the feeling that currently, next week, the Istanbul Convention, if it was brought into the voting hall next week, we wouldn't have had the necessary support. So I think that we need to solve this issue. In order to achieve what we want to achieve, we need to have some extra effort. And I agree with what Maryna said, the part that I have heard on public campaign. It is indeed very important because unfortunately, there are many myths surrounding the Istanbul Convention, many distortions. But we also need to admit that there is a great number of people who don't know anything about it. And unfortunately, those who fight against it very often use this when they appeal to people who don't know anything about the convention. They appeal to their fears, instead explaining what it is. So I very much agree with the idea that without the public campaign, we won't be able to do it, because currently in the parliament, we won't be able to have the necessary number of votes to ratify. However, there is also something that I would like to pay attention to. I think that all the female MPs present here would admit that in all parties, without any exception, in regard to the Istanbul Convention, there are people with different points of view. Even in our party, despite the fact that we are very actively standing for gender equality and are rather active in this regard, even in our party, there is at least one MP who will definitely not vote for ratification, and I know that for a fact. It's not a majority, but there are some people. And I think that what we lack very much right now is the counting, the head count. It does sound a little bit instrumental, but what we need to do right now, I think that partnership with NGOs here would also be appropriate. I remember how before the parliamentary election, all the parties who ran received requests from ecological organizations, and those environmental organizations asked what we thought about carbon tax, about electricity generation, about deforestation and combating it. And so they compiled this sort of a checklist, and they asked all parties to fill the checklist, asking to explain their point of view on the issue. And after that, they compiled the evaluation, how the party programs and party points of view, how much environmental they were in the context that were interesting to them. And I've been thinking for a while that it would have been useful to create this checklist and send such a questionnaire to all the MPs in the Verkhovna Rada, not to the parties, but to specific people, so that we would have the head count and the understanding how many votes we have right now. If we don't have enough votes, why they are lacking, what exactly frightens the deputies, why they are cautious speaking in support of the convention. And to get this kind of clearer picture of what situation is right now. Because I say that I have a feeling that if we put it out for vote, we won't have enough votes for ratification, but I don't know how many we will be lacking. And when we don't know how many votes we're lacking, it is rather difficult for us to build some joint work and to understand how many votes we still need. So I would like to repeat once again that unfortunately in all political parties, there are people who stand against ratification. Some parties have more of them, some parties have fewer, but they're present everywhere. So it's important for us not only to hear the party point of view, but we need to understand how exactly we have 226 votes. We need to fight for receiving 226 votes. It's a mathematical, purely mathematical process of collecting votes. This is something that our opponents are doing very well. And I think we need to take a very instrumental approach to this and maybe start with the questionnaire for all deputies, like 5 questions in order to understand their attitude. And in case they're against, to understand why they're against, and then to understand how to work with them. So I have this like very practical proposal, and I think that it would be also appropriate for it to be initiated by the representatives of the civil society so that it would look more independent and more objective. And I think that in this case, we would have a clear plan on what exactly needs to be done and how many votes we are lacking to reach those 226 that we're dreaming of. So many years and many generations of women and also men have been fighting for these votes. This is something that I wanted to add, not to repeat what other colleagues have already said. This is my suggestion on how we can move on in order to achieve what we want to achieve. Thank you very much, Inna. And I would like to immediately say that the Public Expert Council at the Equal Opportunities Interfaction Union is ready to join these initiatives and also other initiatives. And also, I would like to add that during the events that we carry out, the events that the NGOs have, we remind people about the existence of Istanbul Convention. We provide information about this. We explain about different cases and do everything in order to raise awareness about what Istanbul Convention is. And we are also ready to join the initiative that you suggest. I think that we can have another expert discussion on what is the best way to organize this survey and what the next steps might be. And now I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Kateryna Levchenko. She is the Government Commissioner for Gender Policy. Kateryna, in your opinion, what are the challenges for ratification and how we can overcome them? The floor is yours. Thank you, Ella. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear MPs, our international colleagues, and colleagues from NGOs. This is an important topic and an important day. And I think that this morning, many of you have heard the European Conference on Gender Equality and Istanbul Convention that was organized by the Council of Europe. It is still going on, and the German government and the questions that we are discussing at our roundtable today have been discussed by the heads of European countries, heads of the Council of Europe. The Secretary General also spoke, Mrs. Mariya Vučić, and the heads of the base. And so all the issues discussed were related to manipulations around the Istanbul Convention and the necessity to overcome them jointly. And the fact that the Istanbul Convention is indeed a document that helps to protect those who suffered from domestic violence and helps prosecute the offenders. But it is also a sign of being included into the club of democratic countries who support democracy and who support human rights and the rule of law. And speaking about the challenges, Ella, I think there are many. But I think that preparing for ratification and preparing for possible voting, I think that there is the idea that national legislation is enough. So the self-sufficiency of national legislation is placed in opposition to international law. And the law on preventing and combating domestic violence is cited as an example. And there are also documents that were adopted to implement it. And in my opinion, ruining this wrong argument needs to be the most important point of communication, primarily with the MPs and who are making the decisions along the MPs, and also when talking to the society and society in general, because it is a very dangerous argument. It is dangerous not only because of non-ratification of the Istanbul Convention, but also because we are defying the norms and rules of international law. It's a rather powerful movement now at the international level that is supported and financed and initiated by the Russian Federation, that has clearly set the task to ruin the system of international organizations, of international law, and is very actively doing it. And the Council of Europe, where this convention belongs, is the first organization that has already felt this destructive influence of the Russian Federation. And I think that the Istanbul Convention was also chosen for a reason. Rosa, I see that you agree with me. And it's not just the issue of the Istanbul Convention. I think it's also the issue related to other documents. So what we need to do? We have prepared an analytical document, National Legislation Against International Law, together with the civil organizations, La Strada Ukraine, Women's Perspectives, National Council of Women of Ukraine, Informational Consultancy Center Insight, Center for Gender and Social Studies, the Union of Women of Ukraine. This document is currently being drafted, being prepared to be published and distributed. And this document contains about 15 arguments that briefly explain why national legislation is not enough compared to ratification of the Istanbul Convention, and why without the convention we will never be able to change the legislation in a way to fully include all those principles and provisions of the convention, especially in the part that is related to violence against women. Because when we are speaking about domestic violence, we can cite significant progress. When we are talking about violence against women, we have not observed such significant progress yet. What are the arguments we have there? This is also the monitoring and reporting to international organizations, and the heads of states and international organizations have also mentioned it during the Berlin conference today. It's also an important Euro-integrational step that harmonizes our political measures to measures in the other countries in Europe. And it's also important with this point of view of Russian Federation in the background. It gives an opportunity to Ukraine, as Lika has already mentioned, to be at the forefront and to be a country that actively supports modern and democratic values. It is also more legal support and protection for those who have been affected by the violence and improving of access to justice. Even without the ratification, some judges try to reference the convention, but of course they will be really able to do it when the document is ratified. It is also the issue of protection of Ukrainian citizens abroad, primarily in European countries. Ukraine has 80 bilateral agreements, but those are about international legal help, but it's with non-European countries. So such multilateral treaty should help in protection of citizens who have suffered abroad. On this issue, we have also had consultations with the participation of the Ministry of Justice and the Deputy Minister Valeria Kompaniets and the head of the Coordination Center on Free Legal Aid, the Prosecutor General's Office, and the Supreme Court judges, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the NGOs, Ukrainian Women's Funds, against Eurofem, La Strada, Women's Perspective. It took place on April 29th, and it was on protection of citizens who were affected by gender-based violence, including domestic violence abroad. We wanted to actualize the additional information and arguments on the importance of ratification of the Istanbul Convention. And we also prepared analytical materials with conclusions to use them in advocacy campaign and to use them in advocacy work. And also speaking about the backlash to ratification, I should say that we need to all the time remember and emphasize that it is the part of the hybrid war against Ukraine. This is a part of the non-armed aggression against Ukraine perpetrated by the Russian Federation and also against other countries. It is for a reason that the Eastern Europe suffers. Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Armenia, Bulgaria, Romania, the countries that have been under the influence or are still under the influence of the Russian Federation. And if the society wants a different civilizational choice than the empire, the former empire, or the future empire, I think it's our imperial past, not our imperial future, but the Istanbul Convention is an important instrument for this. All of this, all these documents and these arguments have been drafted and developed to be further used in the informational campaigns. We know that we have developed a communication concept on gender equality, and the Ministry of Culture is preparing a plan, and tasked by Olga Stefanishina, they are now working on the part that is on communication of countering violence, combating all kinds of gender-based violence and domestic violence, together with the Ministry of Social Policy and civil society organizations to use this plan for further promoting of the Istanbul Convention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kateryna, for your speech. And given that we are limited in time, I would like to, without any further ado, give the floor to Oksana Pokalchuk, Head of Amnesty International Ukraine. Over to you, Oksana. Thank you so much, Ella. I'll try to be as brief as possible. My colleagues have already mentioned lots of important things today regarding to how do we promote this convention. Each of us, we have mainly women speaking today, each of us has her vision of how it can be done. Our organization works with people on the ground. We see activists, active men and women of different age who want to do something to change things for better in Ukraine, for the convention to be ratified, and we are trying to work with them. What do we see? It was also mentioned previously that many people have no slightest clue about what Istanbul Convention is about. And I'm not now talking about people who work in the parliament or those who deal with it because of their line of work. We're talking about those people who will be voting for one or another political force, about so-called ordinary people that we're working with. And our experience is as follows. We as an organization started to very actively spread the information about the Istanbul Convention in a clear-cut, easy-to-understand way. We're a small organization, we do not have huge opportunities, the ones that the social services would have, or the Ministry of Digital Transformation. But at least at our level, we are trying to not only engage bloggers, not only work with Instagram, we also do that, of course, but we also are trying to work with other groups of audience. For example, recently, we had an advertisement in the Rynek, which is a shopping mall quite popular in Kyiv that covers certain layer of the society. So inside of the shopping mall, we have put up audio and visual ads in a very simple language with a very nice picture. So we are trying to look for new formats to convey this message. We also have resumed work in the east of Ukraine, working with women who were victims of domestic violence, and we're trying to engage them so that they can spread information about what Istanbul Convention is about. Of course, we lack support from people on the ground so that we can spread this information. We miss it a lot because we can get to active citizens, but then they are faced with the glass ceiling represented by village heads, rural councils who do not want to work on these initiatives without any instructions coming from the top, without money or anything else. It all depends on specific situation, each specific case. So what we are talking about today at this event, about what is being done by the MPs, about the caucus, about the supranational organizations, is of utmost importance because this, in fact, is a flagship that we can rely on and motivate, mentioned by me, heads of the villages and representatives of local authorities, local government, to remove these glass ceiling so that our activists can organize meetings and various events. I'd like to draw your attention of each and every woman who is here with us today, that of course you cannot try and do everything. Your efforts are very important and very much needed. I just would like to draw your attention to the thing that has not yet practically been mentioned today. People who do not have access to resources, people who do not have access to knowledge, people who do not even have access to reading such important documents and know about such important campaigns that we're doing. We have to speak in an easy to understand language. with very different layers of society. As simple as possible, as easy to understand as possible, because some people do not even know what domestic violence is, because for many people, this word combination, domestic violence, is way too difficult to comprehend and understand. So we have to come up with something simple, easy to understand, so that you, members of the parliament or women who are working on top level positions, when you're speaking on radio and TV, so that ordinary citizens can hear you and that they can really understand what you're talking about, because you're doing an unbelievable job, a very important job. But we see this gap between what you are doing and lack of understanding among lots of people in the country. So I'd like to encourage you to also simplify the language you're using and look for opportunities to talk about your unbelievable contribution in such a way so that a person, I don't know, I'm thinking about one of the interviews that we work with, a person from Cherkasy Oblast, 47 years old woman who lives in a village, understands what you're talking about and can tell her neighbor about it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Oksana. I would also like to add that lots of people at the local level, especially in small villages, small localities, do not know that they are victims of domestic violence. And when you start telling them that this is a violence against you, and she said, I never actually knew, because I live in a world that functions like that, and it appears to be that the person lives in the world of violence. Previous speaker mentioned mass media. So our impact should be much stronger, more powerful. And sometimes there are interviews or programs, TV programs with us when nobody's watching TV late at night or when nobody's listening to the radio. So we have to bring together influential people of top level, well-known people, the experts, and invite them to this dialogue in mass media. Now I'd like to give the floor to the representatives of Slovianske Sertse NGO, Ms. Kateryna Khaneva. This organization works in Donbass, in Donetsk Oblast. And she's very well aware of the problems that the local women are faced with, specifically in the armed conflict zone. Kateryna, over to you. She is coordinator of gender-based violence prevention and response unit at NGO Slovianske Sertse, Slavic Heart. Over to you, Kateryna. Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. Can you hear me? We can barely hear you. How about now? Unfortunately, we can barely hear you. Good afternoon. We can hear you now. Yes, we can hear you now. I'm incredibly glad that I have been invited. I was extremely glad to listen to all of the speakers who are speaking today. But very oftentimes, I'm the voice of those women that we are working with. I represent a women advocacy organization that has been helping women for 5 years now, women who are victims of domestic violence and live in the east of the country. While we were talking with you, 3 women called me who were asking to help them. These are women who are walking a very thorny path to fight for their rights. So I'm very sorry, but I would not say that we have advanced in terms of adopting legislation, because every single day I hear the stories of those women we are working with. We have cases when it's been more than 2 years since the women started attempts to prove that there is a perpetrator who should be prosecuted. Today marks the 10th anniversary of the signature of the Istanbul Convention. And for me today, is the anniversary of our 26,000 people signing the petition to the president to ratify the Istanbul Convention. Many speakers said that the civil society needs to be more united. Believe me, women in Ukraine already have figured out what is gender-based, domestic violence, and any other types of violence. Believe me, we're getting stronger. If MPs need support from our level, I believe that in December, there will be 16 days against the violence. It will mark the day when Ukraine has signed Istanbul Convention, so we can unite our efforts and support MPs. Because those women who are walking the thorny path, for them it is incredibly difficult, and they're ready to talk about it. Over the years of our work, we have organized lots of information sessions and meetings with women. We are working with women's community. We meet with them a lot. I'd like to tell that women are ready to a more decisive action. That is why I wonder whether the parliament will hear our voice, whether the MPs will hear our voice, whether the committees or the president, the decision makers will hear our voice. Who should I address my request to so that our voice is finally heard? We demand the ratification of the Istanbul Convention in our country because those sporadic actions are not effective and they do not provide for safety of people who are victims of domestic violence. I also am an example. I'm a person working in this domain who knows the legislation, and for 2 years I was a victim of domestic violence. I was using all possible algorithms, all legal ways. The only thing that I have managed to achieve is that the perpetrator is punished. He had to pay a fine of 170 hryvnia, which is about €5. He was torturing me and my children for 2 years. And I know many stories when women cannot impose even a fine this little, this small. Probably my speech is not as merry as you would like it to be. But I would like to say that the civil society is ready to be engaged. If somebody needs some specific cases, we can provide you with chapters of paperwork that is going from one court to another court. There are women with children who are ready to speak in the parliament, who are ready to ask questions, to address them to the MPs who think that there is no need in ratifying this document. If needed, we can do all of that. I'm extremely grateful to Amnesty International's support. This is a very awesome cooperation, and that assists us in making our job more visible, of a better quality, have a cooler experience of activism when we do not have any leverages. We're a small organization operating in the east of Ukraine, but they are teaching us of how we can become more powerful. I'm talking about the civil society, about the women. How can we unite our efforts and how do we fight for our rights? Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I hope that if somebody would like to get some more examples or see civil society stepping up its activities, we're always open for the dialogue. We're always open to cooperation and a kind of public events. And believe me, I know lots of representatives of women advocacy organizations. I believe you have seen them at various rallies. There are more and more of us. And if we get together in Kiev, for example, this year during the celebration of 16 years against violence, which would mark 10 years since the state started promising us that this document will be ratified. None of the MPs will ever be hesitant whether the laws are okay or not. My child has been going to the rallies for 2 years now with a poster, and the poster says that when she was born, the state promised to ratify the Istanbul Convention, and my daughter every single year crosses out the date and adds the new date. So I hope that 2021 will be the final year on the poster of my child, and that my child will be proud that she was a part of this process. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much, Kateryna. It is extremely important for us to hear speeches made by people who are working in small towns and villages, so that we can demonstrate that the national legislation is not sufficient. We know that there are bylaws that sometimes are quite contradictory. We know that some pieces of legislation do not work at the local level, and that decentralization also matters. And it is necessary to raise awareness among the representatives of the amalgamated communities, because small towns and villages unfortunately do not know much about the Istanbul Convention and do not know how to properly use the legislation aimed at countering domestic violence. Or as I have already mentioned, we know lots of cases when various pieces of legislation contradict one another. Thank you, Kateryna. And I know that we also have Vira Varyga with us. I see her saying that she would like to say a couple of words. Vira Varyga, Positive Women Charity Foundation. Thank you. I understand that probably I'm the last for the day. You have 1 minute. And I'm extremely short on time. That is why I will not be given all of the numbers and figures that I wanted to present today to demonstrate you the visualization that has to do with the violence of women who live with HIV. Today, I'm representing the National Network of Women who live with HIV, the network that was created and is managed by the women. We are fighting for the rights, service, advocacy activities, and one of lines of our work is countering violence against HIV-positive women. Yes, of course, we also participate in information campaigns. We've been doing that for 6 years now. The campaign that are dedicated to 16 days against gender-based violence. And now on behalf of the women, those women who were affected by domestic violence, I'd like to also confirm that we're ready to join all of the efforts that were mentioned by you today. I'd like to express the gratitude to all of the previous speakers, because your speeches and your experience is very much inspiring. And I would like to tell the following. Why do we so much push for the ratification of the Istanbul Convention? Because more than 1/3 of women, according to our research that was carried out by working with 1,000 women living in Ukraine with HIV, more than 1/3, namely 35.3% of women, were victims of domestic violence. It happened after they learned about their status, and this was violence from their intimate partner or their husbands. And this share of women is higher than the average in Ukraine by 19.5%, and more than half of women surveyed did not receive any support after being victims to domestic violence. 71% from the recent research that we carried out in 2020, when we interviewed 1,000 persons, 300 women, 71% of women said that they did not ask for help because they do not believe that they will get this support and help.
так сказать, доверия, да, к неправительственным организациям.
And if we look at the trust ranking to healthcare professionals, police, etc., so if we take police, the level of trust is the lowest in women. What does that tell us about? The law that is in place as of today does not work properly, and it cannot serve as a substitute for the Istanbul Convention. And I would like to tell that today a woman called us. She's HIV positive, and she is a victim of sexual violence. Moreover, man is now blackmailing her. HIV is a factor that aggravates violence against women. And on the other hand, domestic violence can also lead to higher risks of being infected with HIV. And we cannot ignore that. We cannot turn a blind eye to that. Of course, we're more than interested in the ratification of Istanbul Convention. We want to engage women from the community to this process. We want to engage activists, representatives of various networks to integrate gender-based approach, to develop new programs, to introduce gender streamlining in Ukraine. We want to have sustainable funding of shelters, crisis apartments, which was already mentioned by Halyna Skipalska. We want the services to change. We want the approaches to change so that there is an easy access for women with HIV from the key groups to these services, so that it is available, including in villages, in rural area. Thank you.
Я думаю, я недолго.
Дуже дякую, пані Віро.
I don't think that I took a lot of your time. Thank you so much, Vira. Thank you. It's just that I could not hear everything that you were saying. And now I would like to suggest we wind up our meeting for today and would like to give the floor to Larysa. Meanwhile, I'd like to also express my gratitude to all of the speakers today. Thank you, Ella. Time flew. Honestly speaking, I haven't taken so many notes during a meeting for a while now. There were so many to-the-point suggestions and proposals. We can even range them and have a ready-to-use action plan. We planned a discussion and Q&A session, but I do not see any questions in the chat box. I believe that everything was so interactive and everybody was so engaged that we can tick the box as if we already had covered the Q&A. Now, summing up, I'd like to once more emphasize that there is certain symbolism to today's event. And we have planned this event taking into account the symbolism. We have planned it taking into account that the anniversary of the day of signature of this convention and this petition that was mentioned earlier is also of utmost importance. But another thing that matters even the most is that today, it's not that we only talked about some victories, but we have also realized that there is a lot of work ahead of us. It is so nice. And today, the MPs, the representatives of the government, the representatives of the international organizations stayed in Zoom throughout the whole event and actively participated in the discussion. I would say that this is an exception rather than a rule. And probably we could consider it to be kind of an indicator of the interest to this topic, but I believe that it proves that you care for this topic. And I'm glad that all people present here today cared. And what commitments am I taken upon myself on behalf of the public council, on behalf of the expert community that is working to support gender transformations in the Parliament of Ukraine? Advocacy work that was also mentioned by the MPs. We will think about what should be the format of the public campaign aimed at supporting victims. And as was mentioned by Ms. Maryna and then by Ella, the UNFPA several years ago organized an installation in Mariinsky Park. I believe that these kind of public campaigns can really be quite efficient, but in case they are covered broadly. So here we have to think about how do we combine advocacy and information campaigns? What mass media outlets should also be engaged? A problematic thing for me at the moment is organizing inter-party dialogues, but I know that National Democratic Institute is actively supporting gender-sensitive approaches in the parties, so probably they will also cover what has to do with ratification of Istanbul Convention. So I believe that we could also do that. This is one of the tasks that we're working on, and I'd like to ask all of those who are present here today to also discuss the list of these questions, because we have to understand what questions should we address to the MPs, aside from asking them whether they will vote. The most important thing to find out the opinion of those who do not want to vote for it, to ask them why, the reason, so that we can get answers. Using this opportunity, I'd like to say that the experts of the Public Council have done a very detailed analysis of how much the national legislation complies with the Istanbul Convention. So it was compared against the articles of the convention and mentions what is already in the national legislation and which are the gaps. It has not yet been presented, but we're also planning to organize another public event, and would like using these opportunities to invite Mariya, Mezentseva, Maryna, representatives of international organizations, our partners from civil society organizations as well, because I believe that then this document will serve as the foundation that we can rely on, and will help us to understand what else needs to be stepped up to harmonize the national legislation with the requirements and the standards of the Istanbul Convention, which clearly, as of today, is the golden standard. We will prepare a statement that will be submitted to the Parliament and the President, so that he can submit convention for ratification as soon as possible. And last but not the least, I'd like to express their gratitude to each of the speakers. You have dedicated a lot of time to us, to our event. You also participated in the preliminary meeting. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our MPs, and I see that they are truly interested and capable of making that come true together with civil society organizations. I'd like to thank our moderators, Marta, Ella. We did it. Thank you. It was not an easy thing to do, given that we had very long-lasting weekend. I would like to also thank our interpreters who are providing simultaneous interpretation today. I'd like to thank the Secretariat of the Equal Opportunities Caucus, who helped us a lot with technical side, because they very often are working behind the scenes, but they do so much work and I keep working. They probably have some secret. They probably have to make the time free so that they can do more than ordinary people can. And of course, I'd like to spread their gratitude to National Democratic Institute. Thanks to their work study in 2011, the Equal Opportunities Caucus is working in the parliament from one convocation to another convocation, and this caucus keeps withstanding all of our pressure, because as far as you understand, the public council would not be able to do everything it does without them. So thank you so much. And I hope that the approach that we have used today is quite good, because we didn't have the blog that would be dedicated to ambassadors. We didn't have welcoming remarks. We have started with a story of a real person, with a sad story. And Kateryna ended with a story on a more positive note. She expressed her hope that each such story can be resolved. I see lots of readiness to work. I hope that we are not ending on this note, not ending our activism, but rather that we will remember about what we have to do, what is our commitment in front of those women who are victims of domestic violence. Some people as MPs, others as civil society activists, because we did that voluntarily. So we have to be responsible before them. Thank you all. And keep in touch. Let's keep working on it. And I hope that we will be able to not only ratify the convention, but also implement it, which will be the next step, just quite complex as well. And when we implement it, we will demonstrate how good it is. And then the number of those who suffer will decrease, and the number of those who got help will increase. I suggest that this week we prepare the survey form together with you. And given that the next week is the plenary week, so that we can energize MPs. And this is also something that was mentioned by my colleague when we were talking about the head count, because MPs there also are domestic violence victims, so you don't have to break it down for each of them. So we have to tackle that, we have to counter that, we have to help them, because Kharkiv had an open shelter for countering violence that was created together with UN Women. But having united our efforts, you probably are doing the most. And our task is to communicate things properly. And as Kateryna mentioned, we shouldn't wait till these 16 days against violence in December. We have to be prepared. We have to submit the document to the president to get it registered, so that then Parliament can prepare for its ratification. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we will prepare this checklist. I think that we will combine the statement that we'll submit to the MPs and this checklist. Yes, it's better to submit them at the same time. Yeah, because the statement will be very short. It's going to say, ratify the Istanbul Convention. And then probably we will write down the arguments in favor of doing that. But judging from your experience, which works best? Should we submit it by email or hard copy? I think that the assistants of MPs will see the emails for sure. And I think that Another important thing would be a speech next week. I think that together with the caucus, we can prepare that. I think that this is something that the majority of factions work with, and there should be a speech like that made in the parliament to say that. I think it doesn't matter. I think it's going to happen on either Tuesday or Wednesday, but we can do that 10 till 10:30. So a speech and an email, a call to action, and getting answers to the question that you have. So it would be great if by Tuesday morning we'll already have this document at the MP's emails. That would be great from the informational viewpoint, and that would also allow us to demonstrate what we have achieved upon today's 2-hour 40-minute meeting. Thank you. Thank you. So we do not simply have the list of tasks, we even already have set the priorities. So let us get to work. Thank you all. Until next time. And I'd like to ask the organizers to organize another meeting to discuss things among ourselves.
Я вам зараз пришлю інший лінк і пропоную вам перейти за ним.
Добре.
Дякую.
На
На
месенджер.
електронну пошту буде наданий лінк, так?
Я
У
вам
месенджер, так?
в чат, в месенджер я вам відправлю.
Добре, дякую. Будь ласка, ще 5 хвилин, тому що дуже важливо нам.